Question 1. What factors determine the appropriate balance between providing immediate assistance to a distressed individual and initiating the process of gathering information for the San Antonio Police Department in Texas? Option A. The officer's personal belief about the individual's trustworthiness and willingness to cooperate. Option B. The potential for the individual to escape or destroy evidence, even if they are in critical medical distress. Option C. The individual's immediate medical condition, their apparent capacity to understand and respond, and the legal requirements for obtaining statements or consent to interview. Option D. The perceived urgency of the crime being investigated, regardless of the individual's immediate physical or mental state. Correct answer is C. The individual's immediate medical condition, their apparent capacity to understand and respond, and the legal requirements for obtaining statements or consent to interview. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect an individual's rights and ensure the integrity of evidence. Misjudging the urgency or the legal boundaries could lead to inadmissible evidence, disciplinary action, or civil liability for the San Antonio Police Department. The officer must make a rapid assessment of the situation, considering the potential for harm and the legal framework governing interactions with individuals in distress. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves prioritizing the immediate safety and well-being of the individual, while simultaneously initiating the process for obtaining necessary information through legally permissible means. This means providing immediate aid and comfort, such as medical attention or reassurance, and then, once the individual is stabilized and capable of understanding, respectfully requesting consent to speak or informing them of their rights if they are a suspect. This approach aligns with the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, which emphasizes the importance of voluntary statements and the protection of individual rights. It also reflects the ethical imperative to treat all individuals with dignity and respect, even in stressful situations. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately interrogate the individual without assessing their immediate medical needs or informing them of their rights if they are a suspect. This fails to uphold the ethical duty of care and could violate Texas law regarding voluntary confessions and the rights of individuals in custody or under suspicion. The information obtained could be deemed inadmissible in court. Another incorrect approach is to delay providing necessary medical aid to secure a statement. This prioritizes information gathering over the fundamental duty to preserve life and well-being, which is a core ethical and legal responsibility of a police officer. Such a delay could have severe consequences for the individual and expose the officer and the department to significant liability. A third incorrect approach is to assume the individual is a willing informant and proceed with questioning without any regard for their condition or rights. This demonstrates a lack of professionalism and a disregard for due process. It fails to recognize that an individual in distress may not be capable of providing reliable information or understanding their rights, and it bypasses the legal safeguards designed to protect citizens. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a tiered approach to decision-making in such situations. First, assess immediate threats to life and safety. Second, provide necessary aid and stabilize the situation. Third, if the individual is a suspect, inform them of their rights as required by law, e.g., Miranda warnings if in custody. Fourth, if the individual is a witness or victim, seek their voluntary cooperation in a manner that respects their condition and rights. Always document all actions taken and decisions made. Question 2. The evaluation methodology shows that to enhance the efficiency of traffic stop procedures within the San Antonio Police Department, an officer has observed a recurring delay in the documentation process. This delay appears to be impacting response times to other calls for service. Considering the principles of process optimization and adherence to SAPD policies, which of the following actions represents the most effective and professionally sound method for addressing this observed inefficiency? Option A. Initiate a detailed review of the current traffic stop documentation workflow, collecting data on time spent at each stage and soliciting feedback from officers who regularly conduct traffic stops to identify specific pain points and potential solutions. Option B. Recommend a complete overhaul of the traffic stop procedure, focusing on reducing the time spent at the scene by officers, without a detailed analysis of the documentation process itself. Option C. Discuss the observed delay with a few senior officers during informal breaks and propose a change based on their general opinions. Option D. Immediately implement a new, simplified documentation form based on the officer's personal experience and intuition about where the delays are occurring. The correct answer is A. Initiate a detailed review of the current traffic stop documentation workflow, collecting data on time spent at each stage and soliciting feedback from officers who regularly conduct traffic stops to identify specific pain points and potential solutions. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that effective process optimization within the San Antonio Police Department, SAPD, requires a systematic and data-driven approach to identify and address inefficiencies. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires officers to balance immediate operational needs with the long-term benefits of process improvement, while also adhering to departmental policies and ethical standards. Careful judgment is required to ensure that proposed changes do not compromise public safety or officer well-being. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of existing procedures, gathering input from officers directly involved in the process, and analyzing performance data to pinpoint bottlenecks and areas for improvement. This method is correct because it aligns with the principles of evidence-based policing and continuous improvement, which are fundamental to modern law enforcement. Specifically, the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure and SAPD internal general orders emphasize the importance of efficient and effective law enforcement operations, which can be achieved through informed process optimization. This approach ensures that changes are practical, sustainable, and contribute to better service delivery to the San Antonio community. An approach that relies solely on anecdotal evidence or personal opinions without data analysis is incorrect. This fails to provide objective justification for changes and may lead to the implementation of solutions that are not effective or even detrimental. It also overlooks the requirement for data-driven decision-making, often mandated by departmental policy, for significant operational changes. Another incorrect approach is to implement changes without consulting the officers who execute the processes. This disregards the valuable frontline knowledge and experience of the officers, leading to potential resistance, poor adoption rates, and the creation of new, unforeseen problems. Ethical considerations of fairness and respect for personnel are also violated. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thoroughness and impact assessment is flawed. While efficiency is a goal, rushing the process can result in overlooking critical details, failing to adequately train personnel, and ultimately undermining the intended optimization. This can lead to increased errors, decreased morale, and a failure to achieve the desired process improvements, potentially violating departmental standards for operational integrity. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the problem or inefficiency. This should be followed by data collection and analysis, stakeholder consultation, including frontline officers, development of potential solutions, pilot testing of the chosen solution, and finally, full implementation with ongoing monitoring and evaluation. This iterative process ensures that optimizations are well-founded, practical, and effective. Question 3. Market research demonstrates that community trust is paramount for effective policing in San Antonio, Texas. An officer observes an individual loitering in a high-crime area late at night, exhibiting nervous behavior. The officer believes this individual may possess information about recent burglaries. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take to gather information while respecting the individual's rights under Texas law and the U.S. Constitution? Option A. Advise the individual that if they do not cooperate and provide information about the burglaries, they will be arrested for vagrancy. Option B. Detain the individual immediately based on their nervous behavior and loitering, and inform them that they must answer all questions to clear their name. Option C. Conduct a pat-down search of the individual for weapons without any indication of immediate danger, and then question them about the burglaries. Option D. Approach the individual, identify themselves as a police officer, and politely inquire if they are willing to answer questions about their presence in the area and any knowledge they might have regarding recent criminal activity, while clearly informing them that they are not obligated to speak. The correct answer is D. Approach the individual, identify themselves as a police officer, and politely inquire if they are willing to answer questions about their presence in the area and any knowledge they might have regarding recent criminal activity, while clearly informing them that they are not obligated to speak. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to respect individual rights and due process. The San Antonio Police Department, SAPD, operates under the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure and the U.S. Constitution, which mandate specific procedures for obtaining information and evidence. Misinterpreting or circumventing these procedures can lead to inadmissible evidence, internal disciplinary action, and civil liability. The best approach involves a thorough understanding of probable cause and the legal requirements for searches and seizures. This approach prioritizes obtaining information through lawful means, such as securing a warrant based on sufficient probable cause or obtaining voluntary consent. This aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Texas state law, which protect individuals from unreasonable searches and seizures. By adhering to these legal standards, the SAPD upholds its commitment to justice and maintains public trust. An incorrect approach would be to pressure the individual into providing information without establishing probable cause or obtaining consent. This violates the individual's right against self-incrimination and the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. Such actions could lead to evidence being suppressed in court and disciplinary action against the officer. Another incorrect approach would be to detain the individual indefinitely without legal justification, hoping they will eventually provide information. This constitutes unlawful detention and infringes upon the individual's liberty. The SAPD is bound by legal standards that define reasonable suspicion and probable cause for detention. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the individual's perceived guilt or suspicious behavior without concrete evidence to justify further action. While intuition can be a valuable tool, it must be supported by articulable facts that rise to the level of reasonable suspicion or probable cause to justify any infringement on an individual's rights. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the legal standard applicable to the situation, e.g., reasonable suspicion, probable cause. They must then gather objective facts to support meeting that standard. If the standard is met, they can proceed with lawful investigative steps, such as seeking a warrant or obtaining consent. If the standard is not met, they must respect the individual's rights and avoid actions that could be construed as unlawful. Continuous training and consultation with supervisors or legal counsel are crucial for navigating complex situations. Question 4. The evaluation methodology shows that to improve the efficiency of traffic stops within the San Antonio Police Department, a new protocol is being considered that aims to significantly reduce the average time officers spend on each stop. Which of the following approaches best balances the need for process optimization with the department's legal and ethical obligations to the San Antonio community? Option A. Implement a new directive that mandates officers aim to complete all traffic stops within a strict 5-minute time frame, regardless of the circumstances of the stop, to maximize officer availability for other calls. Option B. Introduce technology that automatically flags vehicles for stops based on minor, non-moving violations, with the primary goal of increasing the sheer volume of stops conducted per shift. Option C. Conduct a thorough analysis of current stop data to identify bottlenecks, solicit feedback from officers and community members on potential procedural improvements, and pilot any proposed changes with rigorous oversight to ensure compliance with Texas law and departmental policy for full implementation. Option D. Rely on the personal experiences and suggestions of a select group of veteran officers to revise the traffic stop procedure, prioritizing speed and ease of execution above all else. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough analysis of current stop data to identify bottlenecks, solicit feedback from officers and community members on potential procedural improvements, and pilot any proposed changes with rigorous oversight to ensure compliance with Texas law and departmental policy before full implementation. Explanation: the evaluation methodology shows that optimizing processes within the San Antonio Police Department, SAPD, requires a nuanced understanding of how procedural changes impact officer effectiveness, community relations, and adherence to Texas law. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits the desire for efficiency against the fundamental principles of due process and equitable treatment, which are cornerstones of law enforcement in Texas. A hasty or poorly considered process optimization could inadvertently lead to discriminatory practices or erode public trust, both of which have significant legal and ethical ramifications for the SAPD. The best approach involves a comprehensive review that prioritizes data-driven insights and community feedback, ensuring that any proposed changes are not only efficient, but also fair and legally sound under Texas statutes governing police conduct and civil rights. This method is correct because it aligns with the SAPD commitment to serving the San Antonio community with integrity and professionalism, as mandated by departmental policy and state law. It acknowledges that true process optimization is not merely about speed, but about improving outcomes in a manner that upholds constitutional rights and fosters positive community engagement. This systematic and inclusive review process is essential for identifying potential biases and ensuring that new procedures are implemented equitably across all segments of the San Antonio population. An approach that focuses solely on reducing response times without considering the potential for increased profiling or disproportionate stops of minority individuals is ethically flawed and potentially violates Texas's equal protection laws. Such a focus ignores the critical need for officers to engage in constitutionally permissible stops and searches, which requires reasonable suspicion or probable cause, not simply a desire to meet a time metric. Another incorrect approach would be to implement changes based on anecdotal evidence or the preferences of a small group of officers without broader consultation or data analysis. This is problematic because it lacks the objective foundation necessary for sound policy development and could lead to the adoption of inefficient or even counterproductive procedures. It fails to consider the diverse needs and perspectives within the San Antonio community and overlooks potential unintended consequences. Furthermore, an approach that bypasses established departmental review and approval processes for the sake of speed is a direct violation of SAPD policy and potentially Texas administrative law governing public agencies. This disregard for procedure undermines accountability and can lead to the implementation of policies that are not thoroughly vetted for legal compliance or operational effectiveness. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the problem or inefficiency. This should be followed by gathering objective data, consulting relevant stakeholders, including community representatives and legal counsel, identifying potential solutions, analyzing the pros and cons of each solution against legal requirements and ethical principles, and finally, implementing and continuously evaluating the chosen solution. This iterative process ensures that optimizations are effective, equitable, and legally defensible within the Texas legal framework. Question 5. The evaluation methodology shows that when responding to an anonymous tip regarding suspicious activity in a San Antonio neighborhood, what is the most appropriate initial course of action for a San Antonio Police Department officer to take to optimize procedural fairness and community relations? Option A. Detain the individuals based on the anonymous tip alone and conduct a pat-down search for weapons, citing the need to ensure officer safety. Option B. Discreetly observe the area and individuals described in the tip from a safe distance to assess the situation for any corroborating observable evidence of criminal activity before considering any direct interaction. Option C. Immediately approach the individuals, identify yourself as a police officer, and demand their identification and consent to a search based solely on the anonymous tip. Option D. Ignore the anonymous tip entirely and continue with routine patrol, as anonymous tips are generally unreliable and do not constitute probable cause. The correct answer is B. Discreetly observe the area and individuals described in the tip from a safe distance to assess the situation for any corroborating observable evidence of criminal activity before considering any direct interaction. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that optimizing processes within the San Antonio Police Department, SAPD, requires a nuanced understanding of operational efficiency, community trust, and adherence to Texas law enforcement standards. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits the desire for rapid response and resource allocation against the fundamental rights of individuals and the procedural safeguards mandated by Texas law. Officers must balance the immediate need to address a reported disturbance with the requirement for probable cause before initiating a search or detention. The correct approach involves a systematic and legally sound method of information gathering and assessment. This approach prioritizes de-escalation and observation, seeking to understand the situation fully before taking any action that might infringe upon an individual's liberties. It aligns with the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, which requires reasonable suspicion for a temporary investigative detention and probable cause for a search or arrest. By observing the individuals and their environment, and only approaching if the observed behavior escalates or directly indicates criminal activity, officers uphold their duty to protect and serve while respecting constitutional rights. This method minimizes the risk of unlawful stops and searches, thereby preserving community trust and avoiding potential legal repercussions for the department. An incorrect approach that involves immediate detention and search based solely on a vague anonymous tip, without any corroborating observable evidence of criminal activity, fails to meet the legal threshold for reasonable suspicion. This disregards the requirement for specific, articulable facts that would lead a reasonable officer to believe that criminal activity is afoot. Such an action could constitute an unlawful stop or search under the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, as applied in Texas, leading to the suppression of any evidence found and potential civil liability. Another incorrect approach, which involves ignoring the tip entirely and continuing patrol without any further investigation, is also professionally deficient. While it avoids an unlawful stop, it fails to address a potentially legitimate concern for public safety that the tip, however vague, might represent. A responsible officer would at least make a reasonable effort to observe the area for any signs of distress or suspicious activity, even if a direct approach is not immediately warranted. This demonstrates a lack of proactive engagement with potential public safety issues. Finally, an approach that involves confronting the individuals and demanding identification, and a search based on the anonymous tip alone, without any further observable justification, is a direct violation of legal standards. This presumes guilt or wrongdoing without any basis, undermining the principles of due process and the presumption of innocence. It is an overreach of authority that erodes public trust and can lead to significant legal and disciplinary consequences. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with assessing the reliability and specificity of any information received. This is followed by observable verification of the information through discrete observation. If observations corroborate the tip or reveal independent grounds for suspicion, then a lawful course of action, such as a brief investigative detention, can be considered. Throughout the process, officers must constantly evaluate their actions against legal requirements and ethical obligations, prioritizing the protection of individual rights alongside public safety. Question 6. Compliance review shows that an officer in San Antonio, Texas, receives an anonymous tip regarding an individual loitering suspiciously in a known high-crime area. The tip provides a general description of the individual and suggests they might be involved in illicit activities. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for the officer to take to optimize the investigative process while adhering to Texas law and constitutional protections? Option A. Arrest the individual based on the anonymous tip and their presence in a high-crime area. Option B. Approach the individual, engage in a brief, non-intrusive conversation to assess the situation, and observe their behavior and surroundings for any corroborating evidence of criminal activity. Option C. Immediately detain the individual and conduct a pat-down search for weapons based on the tip and the location. Option D. Ignore the tip and continue patrolling the area without further investigation. The correct answer is B. Approach the individual, engage in a brief, non-intrusive conversation to assess the situation, and observe their behavior and surroundings for any corroborating evidence of criminal activity. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual rights and maintain the integrity of an investigation. Misjudging the appropriate level of urgency or the scope of permissible actions can lead to evidence suppression, civil liability, and damage to public trust in the San Antonio Police Department, SAPD. Careful judgment is required to ensure that investigative efforts are both effective and lawful. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves initiating a preliminary inquiry to to gather initial information without infringing on constitutional rights. This approach prioritizes establishing reasonable suspicion before escalating to more intrusive investigative methods. By conducting a brief, non-intrusive conversation and observing the individual's demeanor and surroundings, an officer can assess whether further action is warranted. This aligns with the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, requiring a lawful basis for any detention or search. The Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, specifically Article 14.01 and related case law, permits officers to stop and question individuals when they have a reasonable suspicion that criminal activity has occurred, is occurring, or is about to occur. This initial step allows for a lawful gathering of information to determine if probable cause exists for an arrest or search. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately detaining the individual and conducting a pat-down search based solely on a vague tip and the individual's presence in a high-crime area. This fails to meet the constitutional standard of reasonable suspicion required for a lawful stop and frisk. A pat-down search is a significant intrusion and requires more than a hunch or generalized suspicion. The Texas Code of Criminal Procedure requires specific, articulable facts to justify such an action. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the tip entirely and proceed without any investigation. While this avoids potential legal missteps, it also fails to fulfill the officer's duty to investigate potential criminal activity and protect the community. A complete disregard for credible information, even if uncorroborated, can be seen as dereliction of duty. A third incorrect approach is to immediately arrest the individual based on the uncorroborated tip. An arrest requires probable cause, which is a higher standard than reasonable suspicion. A tip alone, without further corroboration or observation by the officer, is generally insufficient to establish probable cause for an arrest. This would constitute an unlawful arrest, leading to potential civil rights violations and the suppression of any evidence obtained as a result. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a tiered approach to investigations. First, gather information through non-intrusive means. Second, if reasonable suspicion develops, conduct a lawful stop and inquiry. Third, if probable cause is established, proceed with arrest or search. This systematic process ensures that actions are legally justified at each stage, protecting both individual rights and the integrity of law enforcement efforts within the San Antonio Police Department's operational framework. Question 7. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need to assess how San Antonio Police Department officers apply decision-making frameworks when encountering individuals exhibiting potentially concerning behavior in public spaces. Imagine you are an officer on patrol in a San Antonio neighborhood known for recent drug-related incidents. You observe an individual standing near a dimly lit alleyway, looking around furtively and adjusting a bulge under their jacket. What is the most appropriate course of action, adhering strictly to Texas law and ethical policing standards? Option A. Ignore the individual and continue the patrol, as there are no direct indications of a crime in progress, and intervening could be perceived as profiling. Option B. Detain the individual immediately based on their presence in a high-crime area and their nervous demeanor, as this suggests potential involvement in illicit activities. Option C. Directly ask the individual to empty their pockets and submit to a search to determine the nature of the bulge under their jacket, as this is a necessary measure to ensure public safety. Option D. Approach the individual cautiously, observe their behavior for specific indicators of criminal activity or impairment, and if articulable facts supporting reasonable suspicion are developed, initiate a lawful stop for further investigation. The correct answer is D. Approach the individual cautiously, observe their behavior for specific indicators of criminal activity or impairment, and if articulable facts supporting reasonable suspicion are developed, initiate a lawful stop for further investigation. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing immediate public safety concerns with the procedural rights of an individual, all within the specific legal framework of Texas law governing police interactions. The officer must make a rapid judgment call that could have significant legal and ethical ramifications. The core tension lies in the potential for harm versus the requirement for lawful justification for further action. The best approach involves a systematic and evidence-based assessment of the situation. This means observing the individual's behavior for objective indicators of impairment or criminal activity, such as erratic movements, slurred speech, or the presence of contraband. If such indicators are present and rise to the level of reasonable suspicion, the officer can then lawfully detain the individual to investigate further. This aligns with Texas Code of Criminal Procedure Article 14.01, which allows for arrest without a warrant for offenses committed in the officer's presence, and Article 15.01, which defines grounds for arrest. Ethically, this approach prioritizes lawful conduct and avoids prejudgment based on appearance or location alone. An incorrect approach would be to detain the individual solely based on their presence in a high-crime area or their perceived nervousness. This lacks the objective, articulable facts required for reasonable suspicion under Texas law and could lead to an unlawful detention, violating the individual's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures. As interpreted by Texas courts, such an action would also be ethically unsound, as it relies on profiling rather than evidence. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the situation entirely, even if the individual's behavior appears suspicious. While officers must avoid arbitrary stops, a complete failure to investigate potentially dangerous or illegal activity, when there are observable cues, could be seen as a dereliction of duty and a failure to protect the public, which is a core ethical responsibility of law enforcement in Texas. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to immediately escalate to an arrest without sufficient probable cause. This bypasses the necessary steps of investigation and reasonable suspicion, leading to an unlawful arrest and potential civil liability for the officer and the San Antonio Police Department. It also undermines public trust by demonstrating a disregard for due process. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve 1. Observation, carefully noting all observable behaviors and environmental factors. 2. Articulation, mentally or verbally, if possible, articulating the specific reasons for any suspicion. 3. Legal justification, determining if the observed facts meet the legal standard for reasonable suspicion or probable cause under Texas law. 4. Proportionality, ensuring the level of police action is proportionate to the observed threat or suspected offense. 5. Documentation, recording all observations and actions taken. Question 8. System analysis indicates that a San Antonio Police Department officer observes a vehicle that matches the description of one used in a recent robbery. The driver appears nervous and is reaching towards the passenger side of the vehicle. The officer has reasonable suspicion to stop the vehicle and has done so. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the officer to take regarding the vehicle and its occupants, considering the potential for evidence and the need to ensure officer safety, while adhering to Texas law and U.S. constitutional principles? Option A. Secure the vehicle and its occupants, and then request a supervisor and consider obtaining a warrant if probable cause is established and no immediate exigent circumstances exist to justify a warrantless search. Option B. Immediately search the entire vehicle for evidence of the robbery, given the matching description and the driver's nervous behavior. Option C. Conduct a pat-down search of the occupants for weapons and then ask for consent to search the vehicle. Option D. Allow the driver to continue on their way to avoid escalating the situation and report the sighting later. The correct answer is A. Secure the vehicle and its occupants, and then request a supervisor and consider obtaining a warrant if probable cause is established, and no immediate exigent circumstances exist to justify a warrantless search. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for San Antonio Police Department, SAPD officers, balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual rights. The officer must make a rapid decision under pressure, where a wrong choice could compromise an investigation, violate constitutional protections, or lead to the suppression of crucial evidence. The urgency of the situation, coupled with the potential for serious consequences, demands a well-reasoned and legally sound approach. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves prioritizing the preservation of potential evidence while simultaneously initiating lawful investigative steps. This means securing the scene to prevent contamination or alteration of evidence, and then, if exigent circumstances are not clearly present, seeking appropriate legal authorization, such as a warrant, before conducting a search that would otherwise require one. This approach aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, and the established legal precedent that generally requires probable cause and a warrant for searches. By securing the scene and then seeking legal authorization, the officer upholds constitutional rights and ensures that any evidence obtained will be admissible in court, thereby supporting the integrity of the investigation and the justice system. This methodical process demonstrates adherence to the principles of due process and lawful procedure, which are fundamental to the SAPD mission. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately search the vehicle without a warrant or clear exigent circumstances. This directly violates the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. If probable cause exists but no warrant is obtained, and no recognized exception to the warrant requirement applies, like a vehicle exception with probable cause or true exigent circumstances, any evidence found would likely be inadmissible under the exclusionary rule. This undermines the investigation and can lead to the acquittal of a guilty party. Another incorrect approach is to delay any action, such as securing the scene, in order to gather more information or wait for a supervisor. While seeking guidance is often prudent, a complete inaction that allows evidence to be lost or destroyed is professionally negligent. The law recognizes exceptions to the warrant requirement for true exigent circumstances, such as the imminent destruction of evidence. Failing to act when such circumstances are present, or failing to secure the scene to prevent such circumstances, is a failure to perform a core duty. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on the suspect's consent to search if the consent is not freely and voluntarily given, or if the suspect is not aware they have the right to refuse consent. While consent can be a valid basis for a search, it must be obtained legally. Coercion, duress, or a lack of understanding of their rights by the suspect renders the consent invalid, and any evidence obtained would be subject to suppression. This approach disregards the constitutional safeguards designed to prevent overreach by law enforcement. Professional reasoning. Law enforcement professionals in San Antonio, like elsewhere in the United States, must operate within a strict legal framework. The decision-making process should begin with an assessment of the situation against established legal principles, particularly the Fourth Amendment. When faced with potential evidence, the primary considerations are: 1. Is there probable cause to believe a crime has occurred or evidence is present? 2. Are there exigent circumstances that justify immediate action without a warrant? 3. If not, can a warrant be obtained promptly? 4. If consent is sought, is it voluntary and informed? Officers are trained to preserve the integrity of evidence and the investigation by acting lawfully and ethically, understanding that the admissibility of evidence is paramount to achieving justice. Question 9. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need to reinforce decision-making protocols for entry-level officers in San Antonio, Texas, when faced with situations requiring immediate action that may involve potential searches. An officer observes an individual exhibiting highly unusual behavior near a known drug trafficking location, and the officer has a strong but unarticulated feeling that the individual is involved in criminal activity and may be concealing contraband. The officer has no specific, articulable facts to establish probable cause for a search at this moment. Which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take, adhering to Texas law and constitutional protections? Option A. Rely on the officer's intuition and training to conduct a brief pat-down search for weapons, as the unusual behavior suggests potential danger. Option B. Detain the individual based on the officer's gut feeling that they are involved in criminal activity, pending further investigation without specific evidence. Option C. Continue to observe the individual discreetly, attempting to gather specific, articulable facts that, when combined, would establish probable cause for a search or justify seeking a warrant. Option D. Immediately approach the individual and ask for consent to search their person and any belongings, explaining that it would resolve the officer's suspicions. Correct answer is C. Continue to observe the individual discreetly, attempting to gather specific, articulable facts that, when combined, would establish probable cause for a search or justify seeking a warrant. Explanation. This scenario presents a professionally challenging situation because it requires balancing immediate public safety concerns with the procedural rights of an individual. The officer must make a rapid decision under pressure, where a wrong choice could lead to a violation of civil liberties or a missed opportunity to prevent harm. The need for swift action in a potentially volatile situation demands a decision-making framework that prioritizes both effectiveness and adherence to legal and ethical standards. The best approach involves a systematic evaluation of the available information against established legal standards for search and seizure, specifically focusing on probable cause. This approach prioritizes gathering and assessing facts to determine if there is a reasonable belief that a crime has been committed or is about to be committed, and that evidence of that crime will be found in the location to be searched. In Texas, as in other U.S. jurisdictions, the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and Texas Code of Criminal Procedure Article 18:01 governs search warrants and require probable cause. This approach is correct because it aligns with the fundamental legal protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. By seeking a warrant based on probable cause, the officer ensures that any intrusion is legally justified and subject to judicial oversight, thereby protecting individual rights while still allowing for law enforcement action when warranted. An approach that bypasses the need for a warrant based on a hunch or a generalized feeling of unease is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the probable cause standard required by the Fourth Amendment and Texas law. Relying on a vague suspicion, without specific articulable facts, constitutes an unreasonable search and seizure, potentially leading to the suppression of evidence and civil liability for the officer and the San Antonio Police Department. Another unacceptable approach is to delay action indefinitely due to a fear of overstepping boundaries. While caution is important, an officer has a duty to investigate and act when probable cause exists. Indecision in the face of a clear and present danger, where probable cause is established, could result in harm to the public or the escape of a suspect, representing a failure of duty. Finally, an approach that involves coercing consent for a search without probable cause is also professionally and ethically flawed. While consent can be a valid basis for a search, it must be freely and voluntarily given. Any form of coercion negates the validity of the consent and transforms the search into an illegal act, violating both legal and ethical principles of fair treatment and due process. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core issue, gathering all available facts, and then assessing those facts against relevant legal statutes and departmental policies. This involves understanding the specific requirements for actions such as searches, arrests, and seizures. When faced with uncertainty, consulting with a supervisor or legal advisor is a crucial step. The framework should emphasize the importance of documentation and justification for all actions taken, ensuring accountability and adherence to the law. Question 10. The efficiency study reveals a significant increase in reported burglaries in the East Patrol Zone of San Antonio over the past 6 months, while the West Patrol Zone shows a consistent but lower rate. The study also indicates that current officer deployment across both zones does not reflect these changing crime patterns. Considering the SAPD mandate for efficient resource allocation and effective crime reduction, what is the most appropriate mathematical approach to determine the optimal number of patrol units needed for each zone? Option A. Allocate additional patrol units to the East Patrol Zone based on the subjective assessment of senior officers regarding perceived increased criminal activity without a formal data analysis. Option B. Calculate the required number of units per zone by dividing the total number of reported burglaries in the last 6 months by the average number of burglaries a single unit can effectively respond to and investigate, factoring in response time targets and geographical coverage needs for each zone. Option C. Reallocate patrol units based on the total population of each zone, assuming that higher population density directly correlates with the need for police presence, regardless of specific crime trends. Option D. Maintain current patrol unit distribution, assuming that the increase in the East Patrol Zone is a temporary anomaly and that existing resources are sufficient for overall departmental needs. The correct answer is B. Calculate the required number of units per zone by dividing the total number of reported burglaries in the last 6 months by the average number of burglaries a single unit can effectively respond to and investigate, factoring in response time targets and geographical coverage needs for each zone. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a critical need for resource allocation within the San Antonio Police Department, SAPD, to address rising crime rates in specific patrol zones. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires officers to balance immediate operational needs with long-term strategic planning, all while adhering to departmental policies and budgetary constraints. The decision-making process must be grounded in data-driven analysis, and a clear understanding of the SAPD mission to protect and serve the citizens of San Antonio. The most effective approach involves a systematic evaluation of crime statistics, response times, and officer availability across all patrol zones. This data should then be used to calculate the optimal number of officers required for each zone to maintain acceptable service levels, considering factors like population density and geographical area. This data-driven method ensures that resources are allocated where they are most needed, maximizing the department's effectiveness in crime prevention and response. This aligns with the SAPD commitment to efficient and equitable service delivery, as outlined in departmental directives regarding resource management and operational planning. An approach that prioritizes immediate calls for service without a comprehensive analysis of underlying trends is professionally deficient. While responding to calls is paramount, failing to use this data to inform long-term staffing decisions can lead to persistent understaffing in certain areas, negatively impacting overall public safety and officer morale. This neglects the proactive element of policing and can create a reactive cycle that is difficult to break. Another flawed approach would be to allocate resources based solely on historical staffing patterns, without considering current crime data or efficiency study findings. This method is resistant to change and fails to adapt to evolving community needs or departmental objectives. It can result in misallocation of resources, leaving high-crime areas underserved while others may be overstaffed, thereby undermining the department's ability to effectively serve all citizens of San Antonio. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or personal preferences of supervisors, rather than objective data, is professionally unacceptable. Such methods lack transparency and can lead to perceptions of favoritism or bias, eroding trust within the department and from the public. Effective decision-making in law enforcement requires a commitment to impartiality and evidence-based practices. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the problem, resource allocation based on efficiency study. This is followed by gathering and analyzing relevant data, crime statistics, response times, officer availability. Next, potential solutions, different allocation models, are developed and evaluated based on established criteria, effectiveness, efficiency, fairness, adherence to policy. The chosen solution is then implemented, and its effectiveness is continuously monitored and adjusted as needed. This iterative process ensures that decisions are informed, justifiable, and responsive to changing circumstances. Question 11. The risk matrix highlights a potential for public disturbance involving an individual exhibiting erratic behavior near a known crime scene in San Antonio, Texas. An officer arrives and observes the individual shouting and pacing aggressively, but not directly threatening anyone. The individual is also holding an object that could be evidence. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the San Antonio police officer? Option A. Immediately attempt to physically restrain the individual to prevent further disturbance and secure the potential evidence, given their aggressive posture. Option B. Attempt to verbally de-escalate the situation by calmly addressing the individual, establishing a safe distance, and clearly communicating expectations for their behavior, while simultaneously observing for any changes in their demeanor or actions that might necessitate further intervention or evidence preservation. Option C. Prioritize calming the individual at all costs, even if it means allowing them to approach closer to officers or bystanders, to avoid any perceived escalation. Option D. Focus solely on securing the individual and the potential evidence, disregarding their verbal outbursts as secondary to the immediate need for control. The correct answer is B. Attempt to verbally de-escalate the situation by calmly addressing the individual, establishing a safe distance, and clearly communicating expectations for their behavior, while simultaneously observing for any changes in their demeanor or actions that might necessitate further intervention or evidence preservation. Explanation. The risk matrix shows potential threats and vulnerabilities relevant to the San Antonio Police Department's SAPD operations. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance immediate public safety concerns with established departmental policies and legal statutes of Texas, specifically regarding the use of force and the preservation of evidence. A hasty decision could compromise an investigation or lead to unnecessary escalation. The best approach involves a measured response that prioritizes de-escalation and evidence preservation while ensuring public safety. This means attempting to verbally calm the individual, clearly communicating expectations, and only resorting to physical intervention if the situation escalates to a direct threat to the officer or others, or if the individual actively resists lawful commands in a manner that endangers themselves or the public. This aligns with Texas law concerning the use of force, which permits reasonable force to effect an arrest, prevent escape, or overcome resistance, but emphasizes proportionality and necessity. It also aligns with SAPD policy that mandates de-escalation techniques and the careful handling of potential evidence. An approach that immediately resorts to physical restraint without attempting verbal de-escalation fails to meet the standard of reasonable force and may violate an individual's rights if their actions did not warrant such immediate escalation. This disregards the ethical obligation to use the least intrusive means necessary. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on apprehending the individual without considering the potential for evidence contamination or loss, could jeopardize a subsequent investigation and prosecution, demonstrating a failure to uphold the broader responsibilities of law enforcement. Finally, an approach that prioritizes the individual's immediate compliance over the safety of bystanders or the officer by not taking appropriate defensive measures would be a dereliction of duty and a violation of the fundamental responsibility to protect life. Professionals should utilize a decision-making framework that begins with assessing the immediate threat level, followed by considering available de-escalation techniques. They must then evaluate the legal parameters for intervention, including the use of force and the preservation of evidence, and consult departmental policy. This systematic process ensures that actions are justified, proportionate, and aligned with both legal and ethical obligations. Question 12. The assessment process reveals a situation in a San Antonio neighborhood where a distressed individual is loudly expressing grievances and pacing erratically near a busy intersection. Several concerned citizens have called the San Antonio Police Department. As the responding officer, what is the most appropriate initial course of action to manage this dynamic and potentially volatile encounter? Option A. Begin questioning the individual aggressively about their reasons for being there and their intentions. Option B. Observe the individual from a distance and wait for backup before making any attempt to engage. Option C. Immediately attempt to physically restrain the individual to prevent any potential harm to themselves or others. Option D. Approach the individual calmly, using a non-confrontational tone of voice to attempt verbal de-escalation and assess the immediate safety risks. The correct answer is D. Approach the individual calmly, using a non-confrontational tone of voice to attempt verbal de-escalation and assess the immediate safety risks. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a critical scenario requiring immediate and sound judgment under pressure, a hallmark of effective policing in San Antonio, Texas. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need to de-escalate a volatile situation with the imperative to gather accurate information and ensure the safety of all involved, including the officer, the subject, and potential bystanders. Misjudgments can lead to escalation, injury, or legal repercussions. The best approach involves prioritizing de-escalation through calm, clear communication, while simultaneously assessing the immediate threat level and the subject's mental state. This aligns with the San Antonio Police Department's training emphasis on crisis intervention and community policing principles, which advocate for verbal persuasion and rapport building as primary tools before resorting to more forceful measures. This strategy respects the subject's dignity, increases the likelihood of voluntary compliance, and minimizes the risk of unnecessary force, thereby upholding departmental policy and Texas law regarding the use of force, which mandates that officers use only the force necessary to effect a lawful arrest or prevent escape or to protect themselves or others from harm. An approach that immediately focuses on physical control without attempting verbal de-escalation fails to recognize the potential for a peaceful resolution and risks escalating the situation unnecessarily. This contradicts the principles of de-escalation and could be seen as an excessive use of force under Texas law, which requires officers to use force that is reasonable and necessary. Another ineffective approach is to withdraw from the situation entirely without attempting any form of engagement or assessment. While officer safety is paramount, abandoning a potentially volatile situation without attempting to understand or mitigate the risk can leave the public vulnerable and does not fulfill the officer's duty to respond and protect. This could be viewed as dereliction of duty. Finally, an approach that involves immediate questioning about the subject's intentions without first establishing a calm and non-threatening demeanor overlooks the psychological impact of an officer's presence and communication style. Effective communication begins with creating an environment where the subject feels heard and less threatened, which is a prerequisite for obtaining truthful and useful information. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes situational awareness, communication, and threat assessment. This involves a continuous loop of observing, assessing, communicating, and acting, always with the goal of achieving a safe and lawful resolution while adhering to ethical guidelines and departmental policy. Question 13. During a traffic stop in San Antonio, Texas, an officer observes a passenger in the vehicle openly recording the interaction with their mobile phone. The passenger is standing on the public sidewalk adjacent to the stopped vehicle and is not physically obstructing the officer's access to the vehicle or the driver. The officer, concerned about the recording, approaches the passenger and demands they cease recording immediately, stating it is interfering with their investigation. What is the most appropriate course of action for the San Antonio Police Department officer in this situation? Option A. Calmly explain to the passenger that, while they have the right to record in a public space, the officer needs their cooperation to ensure the investigation is not obstructed, and request they step back slightly if they are too close to the immediate scene. Option B. Ignore the passenger and continue the traffic stop without addressing the recording, even if the passenger's actions are creating a distraction. Option C. Engage in a heated debate with the passenger about their right to record, asserting that the officer's authority supersedes their ability to document the stop. Option D. Immediately order the passenger to stop recording and move away from the area, threatening arrest if they do not comply. The correct answer is A. Calmly explain to the passenger that, while they have the right to record in a public space, the officer needs their cooperation to ensure the investigation is not obstructed, and request they step back slightly if they are too close to the immediate scene. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a citizen's perceived right to record and a police officer's duty to maintain order and safety during an investigation. The officer must balance the need for effective law enforcement with the public's right to observe and document police activity, all while operating within the specific legal framework of Texas. Misjudging this balance can lead to legal repercussions for the officer and the department, as well as damage to public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves acknowledging the citizen's right to record, while calmly and clearly explaining the officer's need for cooperation to conduct the investigation effectively. This approach prioritizes de-escalation and adherence to established legal principles regarding public observation of police actions in public spaces. In Texas, individuals generally have a right to record police officers in public places, provided they do not interfere with the officer's duties. The officer should inform the individual that they are not under arrest and are free to leave, but request their cooperation in not obstructing the scene. This respects the citizen's rights while attempting to mitigate potential interference. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately order the citizen to stop recording and move away without any explanation or assessment of interference. This fails to acknowledge the citizen's right to record in a public space and could be construed as an unlawful restriction of First Amendment rights, potentially leading to civil liability for the department. Another incorrect approach is to engage in a verbal argument with the citizen about their right to record, becoming defensive and confrontational. This escalates the situation unnecessarily, detracts from the primary investigative task, and demonstrates poor professional judgment and de-escalation skills. It also risks creating a public spectacle that further erodes public trust. A third incorrect approach is to ignore the citizen entirely and continue the investigation as if they are not present, even if their recording is creating a disturbance or potential safety hazard. While the citizen has a right to record, officers have a duty to manage their environment and ensure the safety of all involved. Ignoring a clear obstruction or safety concern, even while respecting the right to record, is a failure of duty. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first assessing the level of interference, if any, caused by the recording. If there is no interference, the officer should allow the recording to continue while proceeding with their duties. If there is potential interference, the officer should calmly and clearly articulate the specific concern and request cooperation, explaining the need to maintain the integrity of the scene or ensure safety. The officer should be aware of the relevant laws in Texas regarding the right to record police in public. If the individual refuses to cooperate and continues to interfere, the officer may then consider further action, but only after clearly articulating the consequences of continued obstruction. The primary goal is to resolve the situation with minimal disruption and in full compliance with legal and ethical standards. Question 14. The review process indicates that during a lawful traffic stop in San Antonio, Texas, an officer questioned a driver about their involvement in a recent burglary. The driver, after initially responding, stated, "I don't want to talk about this anymore." The officer, believing the driver was being evasive and potentially hiding evidence, continued to press for details about their whereabouts on the night of the burglary. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and legally sound course of action for the officer to take immediately after the driver stated they did not want to talk anymore? Option A. Continue questioning the driver, explaining that their evasiveness suggests guilt and that answering questions is in their best interest. Option B. Immediately cease all questioning and inform the driver of their Miranda rights, including the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney. Option C. Proceed with arresting the driver based on the officer's suspicion of involvement in the burglary without further questioning. Option D. Ask the driver if they are sure they don't want to talk, implying that cooperation might lead to leniency. The correct answer is B. Immediately cease all questioning and inform the driver of their Miranda rights, including the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney. Explanation. The review process indicates a potential lapse in adherence to departmental policy regarding the handling of sensitive information and citizen interactions. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the strict protocols designed to protect individual privacy and maintain public trust. The officer must make a swift, yet legally and ethically sound, decision under pressure. The best approach involves immediately ceasing the questioning and informing the individual of their rights, specifically the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney, as mandated by the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure and established constitutional principles. This ensures that any subsequent statements are voluntary and admissible, and it respects the individual's fundamental rights. This approach upholds the integrity of the investigation and the SAPD commitment to lawful and ethical policing. An incorrect approach involves continuing to question the individual after they have invoked their right to remain silent. This directly violates the individual's constitutional rights and would render any obtained statements inadmissible in court. It also demonstrates a disregard for established legal procedures and can lead to severe legal repercussions for the officer and the department. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the individual's statement and proceed with the arrest based solely on the officer's suspicion. While suspicion may justify an arrest, it does not negate the right to remain silent or the right to legal counsel once invoked. This action undermines due process and can lead to wrongful arrest claims. Finally, an incorrect approach is to attempt to coerce or trick the individual into waiving their rights after they have been invoked. This is unethical and illegal, as it constitutes a violation of the individual's fundamental rights and can lead to disciplinary action and criminal charges. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and departmental policy. This involves recognizing when an individual has invoked their rights, immediately ceasing all questioning, and clearly informing them of their rights again. Documentation of the interaction, including the invocation of rights and the officer's response, is also crucial. This systematic approach ensures legal compliance, ethical conduct, and the integrity of law enforcement actions. Question 15. Performance analysis shows that responding officers at San Antonio, Texas crime scene often face immediate pressure to gather information and secure evidence. Following a reported aggravated assault in a public park, officers arrived to find a distraught witness who saw the entire incident. The suspect has fled the scene. What is the most appropriate and legally sound course of action for the initial responding officers in San Antonio, Texas? Option A. Secure the immediate area to prevent contamination, ensure the witness is safe and calm, and immediately request detectives and crime scene investigators to process the scene and conduct detailed interviews. Option B. Undertake a preliminary forensic examination of the scene themselves, including dusting for latent prints and collecting visible trace evidence, before specialized units arrive. Option C. Allow the witness to walk around the park freely to identify and describe any potential evidence they might have seen, and then have the patrol officers document these observations. Option D. Begin extensively questioning the witness about the suspect's appearance and escape route to gather immediate intelligence, while allowing them to point out relevant areas of the park. The correct answer is A. Secure the immediate area to prevent contamination, ensure the witness is safe and calm, and immediately request detectives and crime scene investigators to process the scene and conduct detailed interviews. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for immediate information gathering during a critical incident and the legal and ethical obligations to respect individual rights and maintain the integrity of evidence. Officers must act swiftly, but also deliberately, ensuring their actions are lawful and do not compromise potential future legal proceedings. The pressure of a high-stakes situation can lead to hasty decisions that may have significant legal ramifications. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves securing the scene and immediately requesting appropriate specialized units, such as detectives or crime scene investigators, to handle the collection of evidence and any necessary interviews. This approach is correct because it adheres to the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure and established law enforcement best practices. By involving specialized personnel, officers ensure that evidence is collected in a manner that preserves its admissibility in court, minimizing the risk of contamination or improper handling. This also allows the responding officers to focus on their primary duties of ensuring public safety and apprehending any immediate threats, while delegating the complex and legally sensitive tasks of evidence processing to those with the requisite training and expertise. This division of labor is crucial for maintaining the chain of custody and upholding due process. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately questioning the witness extensively about the suspect's identity and actions, without first securing the scene or considering the witness's emotional state. This is professionally unacceptable because it prioritizes immediate information over the proper preservation of the scene and potential evidence. It could lead to the witness providing unreliable information due to stress or trauma, and it risks contaminating the scene before specialized investigators can properly document and collect evidence. Furthermore, extensive questioning without proper legal advisement or consideration for the witness's well-being could raise ethical concerns. Another incorrect approach is to allow the witness to freely roam the scene to point out details, even after the immediate threat has been neutralized. This is professionally unacceptable, as it significantly increases the risk of evidence destruction or contamination. Witnesses, even with good intentions, can inadvertently disturb or remove crucial forensic evidence such as fingerprints, DNA, or trace evidence, thereby jeopardizing the investigation and the potential for a successful prosecution. This action directly violates the principles of evidence preservation mandated by law enforcement protocols. A third incorrect approach involves the responding officers attempting to conduct a full forensic sweep of the scene themselves, including collecting potential DNA samples and dusting for fingerprints, without waiting for or involving specialized crime scene personnel. This is professionally unacceptable because it assumes a level of expertise and equipment that general patrol officers may not possess. Improper collection or preservation techniques can render evidence inadmissible in court, undermining the entire investigation. It also diverts patrol officers from their core responsibilities of maintaining order and responding to other calls for service. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes scene security and the involvement of specialized units when dealing with potential crime scenes. This framework involves 1. Immediate assessment of the situation to ensure officer and public safety. 2. Securing the perimeter of the scene to prevent unauthorized access and contamination. 3. Notifying and requesting appropriate specialized units, e.g., detectives, crime scene investigators. 4. Providing initial, brief, and necessary information to responding specialized units. 5. Allowing specialized units to take the lead on evidence collection and detailed witness interviews, while continuing to manage the overall incident and maintain public order. This systematic approach ensures that all aspects of the incident are handled effectively, legally, and ethically. Question 16. The performance metrics show a consistent increase in average response times for domestic disturbance calls within the San Antonio Police Department. SAPD over the past 6 months. Officer Rodriguez, a patrol supervisor, has noticed this trend and is concerned about its potential impact on community safety and the department's reputation. He needs to propose a course of action to address this issue. Which of the following approaches represents the most effective and professionally responsible method for Officer Rodriguez to address the rising response times? Option A. Advise the Chief of Police that the increased response times are likely due to external factors beyond the department's control and suggest focusing on public awareness campaigns about self-reliance. Option B. Conduct individual performance reviews for all officers who have responded to domestic disturbance calls during the period, focusing on any perceived inefficiencies in their response procedures. Option C. Immediately implement mandatory overtime for all patrol officers on all shifts to increase overall presence on the streets, assuming this will directly reduce response times. Option D. Initiate a detailed analysis of patrol car deployment patterns, call prioritization protocols, and officer workload data to identify potential systemic causes for the increased response times, and then propose targeted, evidence-based solutions. Correct answer is D. Initiate a detailed analysis of patrol car deployment patterns, call prioritization protocols, and officer workload data to identify potential systemic causes for the increased response times, and then propose targeted, evidence-based solutions. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in response times for domestic disturbance calls within the San Antonio Police Department, SAPD. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts public safety and the department's ability to fulfill its core mission. Delays in responding to domestic disturbances can escalate violence, endanger victims, and erode community trust. Officers are expected to exercise sound judgment under pressure, balancing the urgency of the situation with adherence to departmental policies and legal mandates. The analysis requires understanding the practical implications of response times and the ethical imperative to protect vulnerable individuals. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of the data, identifying potential systemic issues, and proposing evidence-based solutions. This includes analyzing factors such as patrol car deployment, call prioritization protocols, and officer workload. By systematically examining these elements, the department can pinpoint the root causes of the increased response times and implement targeted improvements. This aligns with the SAPD commitment to efficient and effective law enforcement, as outlined in its operational guidelines, which emphasize data-driven decision-making and continuous improvement to enhance public safety. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the data as statistical anomaly without further investigation. This fails to acknowledge the potential impact on public safety and neglects the department's responsibility to address performance issues. It also bypasses the ethical obligation to ensure timely assistance to those in need. Another incorrect approach would be to solely focus on individual officer performance without considering broader departmental factors. While individual accountability is important, attributing the entire problem to officer performance without examining resource allocation, training, or procedural inefficiencies is an oversimplification. This overlooks systemic issues that may be contributing to the problem and could lead to unfair disciplinary actions. A further incorrect approach would be to implement immediate, drastic changes to patrol routes or staffing without a thorough analysis of the underlying causes. Such reactive measures, while seemingly addressing the problem, could inadvertently create new issues, such as decreased coverage in other areas or increased officer stress, without effectively resolving the original problem. Professionals should approach such situations by first acknowledging the data and its implications. They should then engage in a systematic, data-driven investigation to understand the contributing factors. This involves consulting with officers on the ground, reviewing operational procedures, and analyzing resource allocation. Based on this analysis, they should develop and implement targeted, evidence-based solutions, continuously monitoring their effectiveness and making adjustments as needed. This process ensures that decisions are informed, ethical, and ultimately serve to enhance public safety and departmental effectiveness. Question 17. Investigation of a tip regarding potential drug activity in a vehicle parked in a San Antonio, Texas public park leads officers to observe the vehicle with 2 occupants. The officers have no further information beyond the initial tip and have not observed any overt criminal activity. What is the most legally sound and ethically appropriate course of action for the San Antonio Police Department officers to take regarding the vehicle and its occupants? Option A. Detain the individuals for an extended period to investigate the tip, then search the vehicle. Option B. Obtain a search warrant for the vehicle based on the tip and the presence of the occupants, if probable cause can be established. Option C. Conduct a warrantless search of the vehicle based on the suspicion derived from the tip. Option D. Approach the vehicle and request consent to search, then search if consent is given. The correct answer is B. Obtain a search warrant for the vehicle based on the tip and the presence of the occupants, if probable cause can be established. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need to gather information for an investigation and the legal and ethical obligations to respect individual rights and privacy. Officers must balance their duty to investigate potential criminal activity with the constitutional protections afforded to citizens, particularly concerning searches and seizures. The specific context of a public park in San Antonio, Texas, invokes the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and relevant Texas statutes governing search and seizure. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves obtaining a warrant based on probable cause before conducting a search of the vehicle. This approach aligns directly with the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. Probable cause, a reasonable belief that a crime has been committed or that evidence of a crime will be found in a particular place, is the standard required for a warrant. A warrant issued by a neutral magistrate ensures that the intrusion into an individual's privacy is justified and narrowly tailored. This process upholds constitutional rights and provides a legal safeguard against arbitrary police action, which is paramount in maintaining public trust and the integrity of investigations. Incorrect approaches analysis. Conducting a warrantless search of the vehicle based solely on the officer's suspicion that the occupants might be involved in drug activity is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Suspicion, without more, does not rise to the level of probable cause required for a warrantless search, absent specific exceptions like exigent circumstances or a lawful traffic stop with reasonable suspicion of criminal activity beyond a traffic violation. Detaining the individuals for an extended period without probable cause or reasonable suspicion to believe they have committed a crime, and then searching the vehicle based on that prolonged detention, is also legally problematic. While officers can briefly detain individuals based on reasonable suspicion for investigative purposes, this detention must be limited in scope and duration, and the search of the vehicle would still require probable cause. Approaching the vehicle and asking for consent to search, while a common tactic, is only permissible if the individuals are free to refuse consent. If the individuals feel coerced or are not informed of their right to refuse, any consent obtained may be deemed involuntary and thus invalid, rendering any evidence found inadmissible. Furthermore, relying solely on consent without probable cause for a search can be risky if the consent is later challenged. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement must employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and legal procedures. This involves 1. Assessing the situation to determine if reasonable suspicion exists for a brief investigatory stop. 2. If probable cause develops, seeking a warrant unless a well-established exception to the warrant requirement applies, e.g., search incident to lawful arrest, automobile exception with probable cause, plain view. 3. Clearly informing individuals of their rights, including the right to refuse consent to a search. And 4. Documenting all actions and justifications meticulously. The ultimate goal is to conduct thorough investigations while upholding the rule of law and respecting individual liberties. Question 18. Comparative studies suggest that officers often face situations where their intuition points towards potential criminal activity, but concrete evidence is lacking. In San Antonio, Texas, an officer observes an individual loitering near a closed business late at night, exhibiting nervous behavior. The officer approaches the individual without articulating specific facts that would constitute reasonable suspicion for a stop or probable cause for a search, asks if they can search the individual's backpack. What is the most appropriate course of action for the San Antonio Police Department officer in this scenario? Option A. Inform the individual that they are being detained for further investigation due to their suspicious behavior, and then attempt to obtain consent to search the backpack. Option B. Conduct a pat-down search of the backpack based on the individual's nervous behavior and the late hour, believing this constitutes reasonable suspicion. Option C. Immediately search the backpack, asserting that the officer's experience and intuition are sufficient justification for the search in this context. Option D. Acknowledge the lack of sufficient legal grounds to search the backpack and refrain from conducting a search, continuing the interaction as a consensual encounter or disengaging if no other lawful basis for interaction arises. The correct answer is D. Acknowledge the lack of sufficient legal grounds to search the backpack and refrain from conducting a search, continuing the interaction as a consensual encounter or disengaging if no other lawful basis for interaction arises. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge for San Antonio Police Department officers, balancing the need for immediate information gathering with the constitutional rights of individuals. The professional challenge lies in recognizing the nuances of probable cause, reasonable suspicion, and consent, and applying them correctly under pressure. A misstep can lead to inadmissible evidence, compromised investigations, and potential civil liability. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions are lawful and ethically sound, upholding the integrity of the SAPD and the justice system. The best approach involves a clear understanding and application of the Fourth Amendment's protections against unreasonable searches and seizures, as interpreted by Texas law and relevant case law. When an officer has reasonable suspicion that a person is involved in criminal activity, they may conduct a brief investigatory stop, Terry stop. However, to search a person or their property, probable cause is generally required, or voluntary and informed consent must be obtained. In this situation, the officer has a hunch, which is not sufficient for probable cause or even reasonable suspicion to detain and search. The correct approach is to acknowledge the lack of sufficient legal grounds for a search and to proceed without one, focusing on other investigative avenues if available, or to disengage if no lawful basis for interaction exists. This respects the individual's rights and prevents the introduction of illegally obtained evidence. An incorrect approach would be to attempt a search based solely on a hunch or a vague feeling of unease. This violates the Fourth Amendment's requirement for a legal basis for a search, such as probable cause or consent. Another incorrect approach would be to pressure the individual into consenting to a search, even if the officer suspects wrongdoing. This could be construed as coercion, rendering any consent involuntary and thus invalid. Furthermore, fabricating or exaggerating the circumstances to create a false sense of probable cause is a severe ethical and legal violation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and departmental policy. This involves 1. Assessing the objective facts and circumstances to determine if reasonable suspicion or probable cause exists. 2. Understanding the different levels of permissible police action based on these legal standards, e.g., consensual encounter, investigatory stop, arrest. 3. If consent is sought, ensuring it is voluntary, informed, and freely given, without any element of duress or coercion. 4. Documenting all interactions and the legal basis for any actions taken. When in doubt, officers should err on the side of caution and consult with supervisors or legal advisors. Question 19. The investigation demonstrates that Officer Miller, responding to a 911 call from a neighbor reporting loud shouting from a residence in San Antonio, Texas, arrives at the scene. The neighbor states they heard what sounded like a physical altercation, but did not witness it directly. Upon arrival, Officer Miller hears muffled shouting from inside the house, but sees no immediate signs of forced entry or visible distress through the windows. Officer Miller needs to determine the appropriate course of action. Option A. Immediately force entry into the residence to investigate the source of the shouting, believing the report of a physical altercation warrants immediate intervention. Option B. Begin questioning the reporting neighbor extensively about the specifics of the shouting, delaying any attempt to assess the situation at the residence itself. Option C. Knock on the door and upon no immediate answer, leave the scene, concluding that the report was unsubstantiated without further investigation. Option D. Cautiously approach the front door, attempt to make contact with the residents, and assess the situation by observing and listening for further indicators of distress or danger before deciding on further action. The correct answer is D. Cautiously approach the front door, attempt to make contact with the residents, and assess the situation by observing and listening for further indicators of distress or danger before deciding on further action. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where a San Antonio Police Department, SAPD, Officer Miller, is presented with conflicting information regarding a potential domestic disturbance. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need to ensure safety with the requirement to gather accurate information and respect individual rights, all within the framework of Texas law and SAP policy. Officer Miller must make a rapid assessment of the situation without prejudging the outcome or violating constitutional protections. The best professional approach involves a measured and objective response that prioritizes de-escalation and information gathering. This means approaching the residents cautiously, attempting to speak with all involved parties separately if possible, and observing the environment for any signs of immediate danger or distress. The focus should be on understanding the nature of the disturbance and determining if a crime has occurred or is imminently likely to occur, without making assumptions based on initial reports or appearances. This aligns with the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, which allows for lawful entry and investigation under exigent circumstances, but also emphasizes the need for probable cause and due process. SAP policy likely reinforces the importance of thorough, unbiased investigation and the protection of individual liberties. An incorrect approach would be to immediately enter the residence and detain individuals based solely on a neighbor's unsubstantiated report of shouting, without further observation or attempt to communicate. This fails to establish probable cause for entry or detention and could lead to a violation of the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the report entirely without any attempt to verify the information or assess the situation, potentially neglecting a genuine need for intervention and endangering individuals. Finally, an approach that involves aggressive questioning or intimidation of the residents before a clear understanding of the situation is established is also professionally unacceptable, as it can compromise the integrity of any subsequent investigation and violate the rights of the individuals involved. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a situational assessment, followed by information gathering from all available sources, an objective evaluation of the facts against legal standards, such as probable cause and exigent circumstances, and a determination of the least intrusive yet effective course of action to ensure safety and uphold the law. Question 20. Assessment of Officer Rodriguez's compensation for a specific pay period in San Antonio, Texas, requires careful calculation. Officer Rodriguez worked a total of 48 hours during a standard 40-hour workweek. His regular hourly rate is $25.00 per hour. Based on San Antonio Police Department policy and Texas labor regulations, overtime is paid at 1.5 times the regular rate for all hours worked in excess of 40 hours per week. What is Officer Rodriguez's total gross pay for this pay period? Option A, $1,150,00. Option B, $1,250,00. Option C, $1,200,00. Option D, $1,300,00. Correct answer is B, $1,250,00. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for entry-level police officers in San Antonio, Texas, involving the accurate calculation of overtime pay based on departmental policy and Texas labor laws. Misinterpreting or misapplying these regulations can lead to underpayment or overpayment of officers, potentially causing morale issues, grievances, and even legal challenges against the department. The officer must demonstrate a precise understanding of how to calculate total hours worked, identify eligible overtime hours, and apply the correct pay rate, ensuring fairness and compliance. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously calculating the total hours worked by Officer Rodriguez, distinguishing between regular and overtime hours, and then applying the correct overtime multiplier as stipulated by San Antonio Police Department policy and relevant Texas statutes. This approach ensures accurate compensation, adheres to legal requirements, and maintains departmental integrity. Specifically, it requires identifying the standard workweek, calculating hours exceeding that threshold, and multiplying those overtime hours by 1.5 times the regular hourly rate. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to simply multiply all hours worked by the standard hourly rate, ignoring the overtime provisions. This fails to comply with Texas labor laws and departmental policy, which mandate premium pay for hours worked beyond a standard workweek. This would result in underpayment and potential legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach would be to apply the overtime multiplier to all hours worked, including regular hours. This would lead to overpayment, which, while seemingly beneficial to the officer, is still a violation of departmental financial policy and could create an unsustainable payroll burden. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of how overtime is defined and compensated. A third incorrect approach would be to round up all overtime hours to the nearest full hour without accounting for the exact duration of overtime. While rounding might seem like a shortcut, it can lead to inaccuracies and discrepancies, especially over time, and may not align with the precise record-keeping required by departmental policy and labor laws. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such calculations with a systematic process. First, clearly define the standard workweek. Second, accurately record all hours worked. Third, identify and isolate hours that qualify as overtime. Fourth, apply the correct pay rate, including any overtime multipliers, using precise calculations. Finally, review the completed calculation for accuracy and compliance with all applicable policies and laws. This methodical approach minimizes errors and ensures fair and legal compensation.